Today I have an exciting reveal. We're painting with the Army Painter Speedpaints. That's right, I got sent by the Army Painter the Mega Set of Speedpaints to test out and share with you guys my thoughts. Huge thank you to the Army Painter for sending these to me. Now, you might be wondering, what are we going to be painting with this? Well, I'm going to be painting up an Escher ganger, hence the lovely outfit. I figured it would be on point. We're going to be painting with some bright colors, which these paints look like they are going to be capable of. Now, I have been excited for these paints for quite a while, basically ever since they were announced, because as you guys might know if you're a fan of this channel, I am a huge fan of contrast paints, and these speed paints seem like they might be a lovely competitor to them. So I'm going to test that out for you today. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get started.
What are you doing, Angela?
Well, Chaos Cultists, as you can see, I have open the entire Speedpaint paint line, and I want to go ahead and actually test these these paints out, because I've never used them before. Not many people have yet because they're brand new, and I have no idea what the actual color is going to look like applied to a model. So what I've done is I've pulled out a bunch of these tokens that I have from the Bloodborne board game, and I think they're just gonna be really good models to test these out on. I'm gonna paint one in each of the colors that Speedpaints comes with and go from there, and then decide how exactly I'm going to paint up the model that I'm painting for you today. The samples are all dry, and I have a lot of feelings. There are some colors that I actually really like. For example, the Crusader skin I actually think turned out really well. The Runic Gray I actually think is the best of the colors, of actually all the ones that I painted. And there are some colors that I'm not as fond of, like this Slaughter Red. Actually both the reds are kind of okay. I'm not super fan of them. I actually really like the Malignant Green. I think that one's a really good color, as well as the Plasmatic Bolt. Some of the colors turned out a bit chalky, in my opinion. Some of them, like the Sand Golem, for some reason on the surface, dried darker than it did in the recesses, where the color actually pooled a bit more, which I thought was very odd, because that's kind of reverse of how you'd expect the color to go down.
It does create an interesting aged effect.
I actually really like the color. I'm not specifically complaining about what it's done. It's just, it's unexpected. And so I just wasn't exactly how I expected it to go down. It is one of the colors that I think I might be using in my palette for the Escher that I'll be painting. Now, overall, I'm pretty satisfied with all of them. I think it's a decent range. I do wish the blues here were a little bit more different. I do think these two in particular are the closest to each other. If you really thinned the, what is it called? High Lord blue, I think it would look almost like magic blue, and you really couldn't actually tell a difference. And the pink, or this purple alchemy, which I don't know why they're calling it purple alchemy, that is definitely a pink, is the chalkiest of them. And I don't know, I really don't like the way that it dried, which is such a shame, because when it was out of the pot and wet, it was a gorgeous, rich color tone.
It's very similar, actually, to that Sand Golem
It
color,
actually is, yeah, it did similar things.
It's darker on the surface than it did into the eye holes, because you can see, like, this Caucasian skin here.
Yeah, the Crusader skin.
The Crusader skin, excuse me. You know, you can see in the eyes it's so much darker.
Yeah, and the Pallid bone did that too. And actually, I really like this bone color tone. Like, some of the lighter colors actually are my favorites, because I think they accomplish what the paint is describing it's supposed to do, which is creating a highlight and a shadow. Now, one of the things that I'm loving about this range is the vibrancy of these colors. They function like a stain, and it really gives you some great saturation out of these colors, and I really dig that. As somebody who really just likes to play with really bold, bright colors and trying to really push the saturation in my color palettes, I appreciate how just vivid a lot of these are. It's like my biggest, I would say, complaint of the paint in this early stage is just that I don't actually think there's that much difference between the highlight color tone and the shadow color tone. It actually all becomes one somewhat flat color, especially with the darker colors. And I do think that has its uses, but it's not exactly doing what the paint is described to be doing, so that is maybe a downer there. But overall, I'm really digging the color range. I'm picked out, I think, what colors I want to use for my model today, so let's go ahead and get to it. After getting the Escher primed up in white, we're gonna start with her flesh using Crusader skin, which is the one flesh tone in the Mega Set. Now, I really like the way my sample color of this worked out, but I found while I was painting the actual Escher that the consistency wasn't quite the same. This isn't inherently a bad thing, but it is something to always keep in mind when you're trying new paints. They may not always work exactly the same every time, especially when you're getting used to them, and it may take a little bit of time for you to figure them out. It's that time of the video where I interrupt to tell you about my Patreon and to let you know that we just added a Discord server which all tiers get access to. So if you're wanting a way to chat with me, share with me your projects, or just tell me what board games you're playing, definitely make sure to check the link below and check out my Patreon. For her outfit, I was inspired by a Joker color palette that I found, so we're gonna be using a lot of greens and purples. With that in mind, however, we're gonna start with a bit of Plasmatic Bolt, which is a more teal color tone because I really wanted some lighter colors in here. I really like the look of this particular one. We're gonna apply this to her tights and a few other locations later on down the line. But for now, we're going to move on to Absolution Green for the bulk of her armor. This is gonna go on the spiky leather portion on her pants, as well as a little bit on her chest armor and arm armor. Now, one of the things that I noticed about the speed paints, especially during this portion when I was using the green, is that they really seem to stick to the spiky portions of a model a lot better than contrast paint. They don't pull away and you don't end up with a white tip, which is a very nice benefit that I'm liking from these colors. Moving on, we're gonna work with a purple next, specifically Hive Dweller Purple, which is the one purple tone that comes in the set. Despite the fact that there is a color that they call Warlock Purple, it's just more of a pink, and we'll actually be using that later. This purple color tone, the Hive Dwellers, is going to go on her jacket as well as any remaining unpainted portions of her armor. The last color that we're going to be using on her clothes is going to be a bit of Slaughter Red. I really wanted to use this color tone because it's the closest, I think, to Flesh Tear's Red, which is one of my favorite contrast paints, and I want to make a comparison to see exactly which one might be better for my Space Marines armor down the line. Speaking of making comparisons, I want to move on to her weapons next to further compare them to contrast paints, starting with Gravelord Gray, because I want to compare this and see how it works as a non-metallic metal, because as you guys might know, I really like Basilicanum Gray as a substitution for metallics. Will this color work as well? Well, that's what I'm here to find out. One thing that I did notice while I was working with this particular color is just how much this paint seems to spread on a model once you've put it down. I did not hit any of the round cylindrical cords that were holding the whip together periodically throughout it with this actual paint tone, yet when I was finished, they were completely saturated almost as evenly as what I'd actually painted. So this paint does seem to spread on the model in a little bit of an odd way. I don't know if that's just how I'm using it, if it's because it doesn't have enough medium in it, but it's something I want to experiment with more later. We're at the roughly like halfway point now. I have such mixed feelings about these paints. On one hand, I really like the colors. I think they're very nice. They're very beautifully saturated. They actually sit onto the model really well. And something that I've noticed is like on, say, this pointy, long, spindly bit with contrast paint, normally the contrast paint kind of flows off of it and you have to reapply it a few times to get it to stick really well. This is very even and clean. But that's also part of my concern is I
see the back.
I don't actually feel like I'm getting that much highlight or shadow with it. I feel like I'm just getting a really nice base tone, which is not necessarily bad, but it's not quite what the paint is advertised to be doing. So it does have me a little concerned there. However, I still really like my results, and I'm hoping with a wash that it'll just like suddenly pop some of those recesses out, maybe bring out some of the colors that have settled into the crevices, and just really make her stand out. I also think this is gonna be great to combine with a lot of other techniques. I'm just not sure how I'm feeling about it simply by itself. But let's keep going and finish the model. Now that the gray is down, I want to go ahead and apply an antique gold to this color palette as well, and for that I'm going to use Sand Golem. I really liked the way that this color dried despite it doing reverse what I expected it to on my samples, so I wanted to use it here as a potential antique gold and again, go for a non-metallic metal look. I don't know if these paints fully will do it and really actually accomplish that look that I was going for, but I still do really like the way these colors go down. Even though I'm done with her weapons, I'm going to stick to using Sand Golem for a little bit longer because I want to use this color on the trim of her jacket. It's the only thing that we left unpainted on her clothes, and I think it's going to complement with the colors that I've used already, and it really does. I am super glad I did this because that ochre color tone just complements with the green, the purple, and the reds that we've already used. And that is one thing I will say, all of the speed paint colors seem to work very well against each other. Now, we have a couple other details to still take care of, so for her belt, we're going to go ahead and use hardened leather. This, while wet, does look very, very similar to Sand Golem, but once it's dried, it is a little bit darker and you do get a distinctive tone out of it. Then the last color that I need to use as a detail is Pallid Bone. This is an alternative for potentially Skeleton Horde, and honestly, I really do like it. I'm very much gravitating towards the lighter color tones for speed paints. This color, Pallid Bone, works perfectly on that skull she has on her shoulder. All that's left is her hair and a couple of feathers and tassels, so let's go ahead and take care of those next. For her hair, we're gonna start with a bit of Hive Dweller purple on the bangs. I just really wanted another splash of purple on there. It is the predominant color on the model, and it is my favorite color, so I'm gonna use it as often as possible. From there, we're going to move on to Warlock purple, which, as I said earlier, is more of a deep pink color tone than I would say a purple, but you know, naming conventions are what they are. I actually really do like this color, and despite the fact that I did not like how it showed up on my sample, I love the way that it actually applied to her hair. It just stands out really nicely, and I just think the color tone is very rich and gorgeous. The last color that we need to use is we're gonna move back to Plasmatic Bolt, which is by far, I think, one of my favorite colors from this line. I'm gonna apply this to the feathers in her hair, the feathers that are hanging in front of her loincloth, and the tassel that it's attached to her whip. I just really wanted to brighten her back up a little bit because her color palette had gotten a bit dark, and this allows me to do that on a couple of key locations on the model that you'll see no matter what angle you're looking at her from. At this point, all of the speed paint is down on the model, and I really like the colors I've gotten, but they don't seem to have a whole lot of depth to them. They're not quite creating the highlight and shadow that I was expecting them to based off their advertisement. So I'm gonna go ahead and apply a quick wash to them to see if I can help that a little bit. And for that, I'm going to use the Army Painter's Soft Skin Wash. I wanted to stick to nothing but Army Painter paints for this, just to see how they were all going to work together, and assuming that these paints are meant to work with their own line more so than anything else. I think it's a fair way to test them out at first. Now that she's not primed, now that she's shaded, let's go ahead and work on her base. All right, so the Escher is done, and I actually think I'm pretty happy with how she's turned out. It wasn't exactly my expectation of how these paints were going to work, but ultimately I am pleased with my final results. Now, because of my experience painting her, I have some thoughts on what this paint might really work very, very well at, and that might be going over top metallic. So I need to get her base prepped for the model, and Necromunda set comes with these really cool pre-sculpted bases, and I'm gonna pull out one of these, paint it up using a bit of Army Painter black paint, and then I'm going to put a bit of plate mail metal from the Army Painter on there as well for a bright silver undertone. And then I'm going to use two of the speed paints beneath it. First, I'm going to start with Gravelord Gray, because I want to see how this compares to, say, Basilicanum from Contrast Paint going over top of metallic, and see what this does differently or if it's similar. So I just want that comparison for reference. Plus, I really like the Plasmatic Bolt. I think it's my favorite of the speed paints. So I want to see what this looks like over metallic as well, because I think it might look really cool. And it gives me some ideas for some fantasy, like ethereal creatures in the future. So let's go ahead and get to that. And here she is. My first model that I fully painted using nothing but speed paint and a couple of other Army Painter paints, but really just one line. And let's talk about my feelings on it, because there's a lot to go over here. This is a brand new paint line, and I know a lot of you are very curious to my opinions. Do I like the paint? Do I dislike the paint? What are my feelings toward it? Honestly, right now, I like the paint. It is not exactly like contrast paint, which I'm actually very happy to see. I didn't want a direct copy of contrast paint. I think that would be kind of boring, and it really doesn't do anything for us as hobbyists. However, they do advertise the speed paints as being something that achieves both highlights and shadows for you, and at least in this first experience with this Escher, I don't really feel like I felt that. I feel like there is a really good solid base color tone that you get out of these, and I'm gonna be curious to see if these paints do something different when you apply the medium that they provided in the box to them, or if you just use a lot more water, or even mixing in contrast medium. I'm kind of curious to see what that does to them as well. So I'm certainly going to be experimenting with these paints a lot more. That being said, I do like them. I think these are going to be a great way to help build up additional color. Like I said, I think they function beautifully as a foundation color tone. For example, the Slaughter Red, I might switch over to be the base color for my Flesh Terror army, or not my Flesh Terror, my Blood Angels army, because I really like that deep red color tone, and I can build up some really nice highlights, I think, using either traditional edge highlighting or even dry brushing over top this paint. There's still a lot of experimentation to have with the speed paints, and I still want to test them out some more simply by themselves, but right now I feel like they're going to be designed to be more used in tandem with other things than solely by themselves. I have a couple more plans for some videos of what I'm going to be doing with these more, and I hope you guys stick around to see them, and let me know once you actually get your hands on these paints yourself what your opinions on them are. I'm going to be very curious to see as they actually launch and go out into the world to see what people are saying, because so far with the other influencers that have gotten a copy from Army Painter, there's been a lot of mixed reviews, and I don't want to judge them immediately after a single use of them. I really want to give them a huge shot, keep using them, and combine them with other techniques, because as you guys have seen me on this channel, as I've continued to grow and develop my own style, I really like to mix the various paints together. I use a lot of contrast, but I also use a lot of bases and layers. I also use a lot of metallics and technical paints. So I think trying to find more and more paints that you can then utilize and bring into your own toolbox and repertoire of what you know how to use is always good. And I think these speed paints are going to be a great addition to my paint collection. Thank you again to the Army Painter for sending them to me to test them out. I'm going to be definitely doing some more videos on it, and probably maybe even posting about it more on Instagram, giving more reviews and talking about the various colors as I continue to use them, because each of them are different, and I really want to explore all of the colors a lot more, because there are 23 colors, and I did not use them all on this single model. So I have been Angela. Before I head off, I do want to give a huge thank you to my patrons as well for supporting us and allowing content like this to continue to happen. You guys are amazing, and I just can't wait to keep going forward with you guys into the new year, talking on Discord, talking about projects, doing all sorts of cool things with you. In the meantime, I have been Angela, you have been watching Hobby Night, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!